This is Harsh Rules. I'm Ben Harsh, and today we're going to learn to play The Last 100 Yards. The Last 100 Yards was released in 2019 by GMT Games and designed by Mike Denson. This game supports up to 2 players and takes from 1 to 3 hours to play. Before we begin this episode, I'd like to recognize the Harsh Rules Patreon supporters that help make content like this possible. If you'd like to support the channel, head over to patreon.com/harshrules to learn more. And once again, thank you for your support. Harsh Rules is partnering with Nightingale Games to support War Room, the 2nd edition on Kickstarter. If you missed the main campaign in June, don't worry, there's still an opportunity to order at a discounted price. And if you already own the 1st edition, you don't need to buy the entire game again. Post-launch, enhanced components like the redesigned morale board, the nano expansion, and other game upgrades will be available at the Nightingale Games web store. So don't miss out on War Room 2nd edition, and keep your eyes on this channel for a rules breakdown on the new quick battle system and other enhancements. The Last 100 Yards is GMT's new series of tactical World War II war games that focus on small-scale squad-level missions with a platoon and company-level command structure. This game differentiates itself from other tactical war games by modeling the momentum of combat similar to team sports such as football. The side that holds the initiative drives the action, while the other side can only react to what they can see. This allows combat to flow in a very realistic fashion, so unlike other tactical war games, where all units may operate with full knowledge of enemy positions on the board, whether or not they would realistically have this intelligence. The series is comprised of 3 core games, all designed around a foundational rule set. Each core game can be played independently from the others, so if you miss Volume 1, you could pick up Volume 2 or Volume 3 and play them on their own. The original core game, simply titled The Last 100 Yards, now retroactively known as Volume 1, contains 12 missions set in a variety of famous World War II locations, such as the Ardennes and southern France. Volume 2, Airborne over Europe, provides 10 new missions set during 2 major airborne campaigns, Normandy and Market Garden. New rules cover airdrops, night actions, and bring new terrain to the series. An upcoming mission pack currently on GMT's P500 crowdfunding program provides 10 additional missions set in 1944 during the Normandy pre-breakout and breakout phases in July-August, the Hurtgen Forest in November, and the Battle of the Bulge in December. The mission pack requires both core volumes 1 and 2 to play. Additional mission packs for British Airborne and Russian campaigns are planned as well. Volume 3 of the core game series is set in the Pacific Theater and covers the Solomon Islands campaign. No doubt additional mission packs are in development for the Pacific Theater as well. In this rules breakdown series, we're going to learn how to play the original Last 100 Yards. However, everything you learn here can be applied to the other entries in the series. We've got a lot to learn, so let's get started. For this rules breakdown for the Last 100 Yards, I will be referencing the series living rules that can be found on the GMT website. For owners of the 1st edition of The Last 100 Yards, the paper rulebook has been updated to a series rulebook that covers all available game modules. Several clarifications have also been made from player feedback and errors removed from earlier drafts of printed copies. As a result, the series living rules is your best reference for learning the game. The Last 100 Yards is a tactical war game that allows players to engage each other in small-scale World War II scenario-based missions. Each side's forces are organized at the company level. In the base game, the United States has 2 infantry companies and 2 armor companies. Germany has 2 infantry companies and 3 armor companies. Companies can be differentiated by colored dots. For example, the U.S. infantry is comprised of Able Company with a red dot and Baker Company with a white dot. Each company is further divided into platoons. A company's platoons are identified by the number inside the colored dot. For example, a U.S. counter with a red dot and a 2 inside it is a member of Able Company's 2nd Platoon. Mastering the organization of game pieces is critical to playing the last 100 yards. Mission scenarios require specific company platoons, and players often need to manage multiple platoons and other supporting units to play. With that in mind, we're going to divide and conquer, and first learn about infantry type units. This is all you need to know to play the game's first mission. Then, later in the series, we will come back and learn about vehicles. Therefore, next we're going to learn the composition of a platoon. The platoon is the primary fighting formation in the last 100 yards. An infantry platoon typically consists of a platoon leader and 3 squads. Squads can be further broken down into 2 sections. When sections enter gameplay, either due to splitting a squad in half or when a squad suffers a casualty, they are randomly drawn from a cup of 4 section counters for that platoon. Now, let's take it one step deeper and review the layout of the squad counter. These counters are double-sided, so let's begin with the full strength side. As discussed earlier, the bottom center of the counter has the platoon ID. And in the upper right-hand corner is the unit ID, which is used to inventory your counters. There are 3 squads in Baker Company 1st Platoon, so you'll see a 1, 2, or a 3 in this corner. Now that the organization bits are out of the way, let's discuss the actual game stats on this counter. The last 100 yards uses a color coding system to provide players visual cues for attack and defense calculations. Green is associated with soft targets like flesh and blood soldiers combated with small arms fire. Yellow machine and armored targets like tanks are fought with anti-tank weapons. And blue is reserved for close quarters assaults, which encompass both unit types. The positioning of these stats indicate how it's used. Offensive stats are on the left side of the counter, and defensive stats are on the right side. Let's look at this unit's defensive stat. Soft targets, like this squad, has a green stat in the lower right-hand corner called cohesion. This stat represents the unit's training, experience, and combat effectiveness. Cohesion functions similar to morale in other war games. Cohesion is the primary defense stat for infantry units. The offensive stats are on the left side. The unit's green small arms value can be found in the lower left-hand corner. The smaller number beside it is its maximum range in hexes with that capability. Its yellow anti-tank capabilities can be found in the upper left-hand corner. Once again, the smaller number indicates the maximum range, and its blue assault value can be found below that. There is no range with this capability because assaults are conducted in a single hex. Next, let's talk about a squad's reduced side, which is known as its disrupted side. Disruption represents an infantry unit faltering under fire or assault. Units faltering under fire and those that go to ground are temporarily out of the fight until they recover. Once disrupted, a unit loses several of its abilities. For example, this infantry unit can no longer use its small arms fire or its anti-tank fire. Other stats may also be changed when the unit is disrupted. Disruption is the beginning of a squad's reduction path. When a squad's cohesion is exceeded in combat, it is flipped over to its disrupted side. If cohesion is exceeded again, the squad suffers a casualty. Once the casualty is recorded, the squad marker is removed and replaced with a randomly drawn infantry section marker. Once again, the section infantry marker can be flipped to its disrupted side and removed as a casualty if its cohesion is exceeded in combat. Next, let's talk about leaders. Leader counters represent a platoon leader and a staff of 2 to 4 men, such as runners and radio men. You'll notice even though the picture of the leader has a machine gun, it's not enough to provide its own small arms and anti-tank values in combat. However, a leader can contribute its stats in an assault. On the defensive side, a leader's cohesion is tracked separately from that of a squad. And as you can see on the right, if their cohesion is exceeded, they can be flipped over to their disrupted side, which decreases their stats. So as individual units, they're not that effective in combat, so what do they contribute? Leaders have several abilities that they can use to assist other friendly units. They may use these abilities if they occupy the same hex as a friendly unit, or in some cases are adjacent to them. A leader's abilities are as follows. First, a leader can be required to make an initiative roll. A player without a platoon leader or an armored fighting vehicle in play at the end of an initiative phase and after any random event results automatically forfeits the initiative to the other player. Leaders may also assist in reaction. Typically, the non-active player's units can only react to their opponent if they're within their line of sight. However, units in the same hex, or if they are adjacent to a leader in a clear hex or a road hex, can conduct what is known as a limited reaction, to either maneuver or recover with those units. A leader may also contribute a -1 die result modifier to a unit attempting to regroup or recover. When a unit attempts to recover, it needs to roll less than its cohesion to flip back to its full strength side. A leader's -1 die result modifier can greatly assist a unit in its recovery attempt. Leaders can also be used to request mortar fire. We'll cover the powerful effects of mortars later in this rules breakdown series. And finally, leaders may also contribute their assault value in an assault. Next, let's discuss support units. Light machine gun and light anti-tank weapon units are specialized sections of 2 soldiers each that support platoons. You'll notice that these section counters do not have platoon IDs in the bottom center of their counters. Support units can be activated with the platoon they're stacked with, or with the platoon they're closest to. Be aware though, some of these counters are not generic. For example, there are 8 light machine gun section counters. One of these counters have a weaker cohesion than its counterpart. As a result, when a scenario calls for one of these units, players should place all of the light machine gun counters into a cup and then randomly draw one out. The drawn unit is the one that will be used in the scenario. Light anti-tank weapons sections, in other words soldiers with bazookas, all appear to have the same stats. Therefore, randomly drawing one from a mug may not be necessary for setup. These support units assist squads in a number of ways. Light machine guns have greater range, and bazookas can help level the playing field against vehicles. However, you'll notice soldiers with bazookas do not have access to small arms fire. Therefore, they need to be deployed carefully. Now that we've reviewed all the infantry type units, let's set up the first mission of the game and get ready to learn the sequence of play. In this tutorial, I'm going to cover the basic rules required to play Mission 1 on their own. Let's walk through setting up this mission. First, locate the mission card for Mission 1 and place it in your gameplay area. Next, place the game's time and casualty track. I'm going to place it over Mission 2 since we don't need to see that half of the mission card. After that, find map 11 and place it beside the other components as shown on the screen. Each player may also want a copy of the combat tables for their reference. Next, let's zoom in and set up the time track and the casualty track. We'll begin with the time track. At the end of each game turn, a die will be rolled and compared to the time-lapse table. The table will establish how many minutes elapsed during the turn. Results range from 2 to 5 minutes. The rationale is that conducting an action may take longer due to enemy resistance. For example, soldiers may weave their way to cover between bursts of enemy fire, or they may duck behind available cover immediately. Not only does this create a narrative, but it also dictates progress in the game. Time is one of the evaluation components in the attacker's final score, which determines victory. Typically, the more time that elapses, the more the attacker's score is penalized. Time is tracked with 3 colored markers. Place the yellow 1-minute marker on the yellow 0 space. The green 10-minute marker on the green 0 space. Finally, there is a red 1-hour marker that can be placed above the red 1 space. To set up the casualty track, I'm going to bring in the mission card for reference. The Casualty Differential Limit section will establish the parameters for setting up the casualty track. Place the German Casualty Differential Limit marker on space 4, and the American Casualty Differential Limit marker on space 2. Finally, the casualty marker itself begins on space 0. Each time a side suffers a casualty, the casualty marker will shift towards that side's casualty differential limit marker. In many scenarios, if the casualty marker exceeds a side's differential limit, then they lose the game. You'll also notice a smaller number in each space. This is the number that is added to the attacker's final score. For example, if Germany is the attacker, like in Mission 1, the closer the casualty marker moves to their differential limit, the more points are added to their final attacker score, which is bad for them. However, if the casualty marker moves towards the American side, then the German player receives negative points, which helps their score. Once the scenario's objectives are met, the score is compared to the mission's victory level. In Mission 1, an attacker's final score of 0 to 35 equals a German victory, 36 to 45 a draw, and a score of 46 or above an American victory. One final note. Scenarios may provide additional mission objectives that are worth points. These points may be added or subtracted from the attacker's final score. Be on the lookout for these additional mission objectives as you play through the scenarios. Finally, there is a marker to track which side has initiative. The Disposition of Forces section on the mission card shows which side begins the game with initiative. In this case, it's the German player who is the attacker. Then, players each roll a die for initiative, and the player with the highest result wins. In the case of ties, odd results mean the Axis player wins the initiative, and even die results the Allies. If the initiative changes to the US player, flip the marker over to keep track of this. Also be aware, the mission grants the German player an initiative die result modifier of +2. However, they only received this die roll modifier if they had the initiative on the previous game turn. So, if the initiative shifts to the US player, the Germans do not get this modifier to try to win it back. If a player has multiple platoons, they roll for coordination on the coordination table. This will tell them if their platoons can activate together. Be aware though, the initiative die roll occurs prior to the coordination die roll. A player's initiative roll can also trigger a random event. If a player's unmodified initiative die roll is equal to 1, they may remove the concealment marker from any enemy occupied hex within 5 hexes and line of sight of a friendly unit. If the die result is an unmodified 10, then they roll on the fate table. The fate table contains a number of interesting events to spice up gameplay. Keep these random events in mind when rolling an unmodified 1 or a 10. And with that, the time track and casualty track, as well as the initiative space, are set up to begin playing the game. Now, let's set up the scenario map. I'm going to bring in the mission card so you know where I'm getting my information from. Every map is organized into hexes with alphanumeric coordinates. Coordinates are determined by the following. Columns are lettered A through J, and staggered rows numbered 1 through 13. According to the special mission rules, half hexes along the east and west board edges are not in play. The northern end of the map is the American friendly board edge, and the southern end the German friendly board edge. These board edges are important to note because when units retreat or withdraw, this is the direction in which they will move. Next, let's review the disposition of forces section on the scenario card to learn how each side sets up their units. As stated before, in this mission the Germans are the attackers and have the initiative at start. The Americans set up first and their units are all hidden. To manage this secrecy, the American player will write down the coordinates for each of their units. American units may be placed anywhere north of row 11. The German player's units begin the scenario off-board. They may enter the map anywhere along the southern board edge, which is their edge of the board. The counters that each side needs to set up are shown in the forces section. For platoon activation purposes, the organic infantry and/or tank platoons, and the organizations thereof, are noted in bold italics. While Mission 1 explicitly states which platoons to use, later missions may list multiple platoons and companies that require a random draw to see which units will be in play. The bold italics is the player's cues on which platoons and companies to make these draws from. The Americans will field the Baker Company's 2nd Infantry Platoon. This platoon is also supported by one machine gun section. All American machine gun section counters should be placed in a cup and one drawn out randomly for this purpose. Germany will field 2 KP Company's 2nd and 3rd Infantry Platoons. Either of these platoons may be supported by one machine gun section. Same as before, all German machine gun section counters should be placed in a cup and one drawn out randomly. As a reminder, platoon numbers are the ones inside the colored oval at the bottom of the counter. Also, the forces section lists the number of steps for each side. The units that comprise this number are as follows. Leaders do not count as a step. Each squad counter counts as 2 steps because they can be broken down into 2 sections each. And the machine gun sections count as 1 step. Before setting up forces, let's look at the mission objective. The mission objective of the attacking German player is to control 5 wooden buildings. There are 9 wooden buildings on the map. The Germans must also control the church in hex E3. Cleverly, the church is the cross-shaped building. Or, to win the scenario, one side exceeds its casualty differential limit. We saw this earlier when setting up the casualty track, or the final score is greater than 46, which probably means the Germans have taken too much time and casualties and lost the game. With all this in mind, each player can now strategize how to set up their forces. The American player needs to determine which buildings to defend, and the German player how they plan to enter the map and maximize their approach to the buildings they want to win. And don't forget, in the first turn, the German player has initiative. The American player can only react if the German player's units are within their unit's line of sight. Keep this in mind when placing your forces. And now, with all that said, this is a good place to break for this episode. In the next episode of this rules breakdown, we will look at the sequence of play and learn how to begin the first mission. If you found this video helpful, please give me a like and share with your friends. To be the first notified when the next episode of Harsh Rules becomes available, please hit the bell icon for notifications. And as always, this has been Harsh for Harsh Rules. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.